I yanked open the front door of my mother's house and froze. Every drawer hung open like screaming mouths. Jewelry boxes lay overturned on the hardwood floor. The antique clock my mother polished every Sunday was gone, vanished like it never existed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked through the violated space. Each empty shelf felt like a punch to my gut. At the end of the hallway, my Aunt Evelyn stood beside the estate attorney, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Everything falls to me. Harper has no legal standing." My throat closed up. My home, my mother's things, my memories all vanishing before my eyes. I whispered, barely finding my voice, "What did you do?" Evelyn looked me dead in the eye, her lips curled into a smirk that made my blood boil. "Tidying up what should have been mine in the first place." My hands shook with rage I'd never felt before. This was just the beginning of a war I didn't know I'd have to fight. My name is Harper Rhodes. I was 31 years old, an accountant who preferred numbers to people. I lived quietly and carefully, just like my mother taught me. She raised me alone, working 2 jobs and still making time to tuck me in every night. Evelyn was her older sister, and they couldn't have been more different. Where my mother was gentle, Evelyn was loud. Where my mother gave, Evelyn took. She was the type of woman who stepped into a room and acted like it was built for her entertainment. At the small accounting firm where I worked, she held the position of operations manager. That made her my superior. Everyone tiptoed around her like she was royalty. I was the one she shoved the hardest, probably because I couldn't fight back without losing my job. She knew it too. That power dynamic was her favorite weapon, and she used it every single day. 3 months before my mother passed away, Evelyn pulled one of her favorite stunts. We were in the conference room during a quarterly review meeting. The owners sat at the head of the table reviewing reports I had prepared from scratch, staying late for 3 straight weeks. Evelyn strutted in 15 minutes late, her heels clicking against the tile. She slapped the folder on the table with dramatic flair. "Here's the work I completed," she announced proudly. I felt my chest tighten like someone was squeezing my lungs. I opened my mouth to speak to correct her lie. She shot me a warning look that could freeze fire. The owners praised her efficiency and attention to detail, compliments that belonged to me. It wasn't just unfair anymore. It was deeply personal. She was stealing my work and my dignity right in front of everyone who mattered. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk trying to calm down. Evelyn leaned down beside me, her perfume choking the air around us. She whispered in my ear, "You're lucky to be here, Harper. Don't forget who brought you into this firm." The words stung worse than a slap. She acted like she owned me, like I was an obligation she regretted taking on, like I should be grateful she even acknowledged my existence. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I said nothing because that's what I always did back then. I swallowed my anger and kept my head down, but something shifted inside me that day. A tiny crack formed in my acceptance of her treatment. I didn't fight back yet, but the thought started growing. Maybe one day I wouldn't have to take this anymore. Maybe one day I'd find my voice. The night my mother was rushed to the hospital, I drove to the firm to grab my laptop. I needed to work from her bedside to feel useful while feeling helpless. Evelyn's office light was on, glowing against the dark hallway. I walked past and glanced inside. She sat alone, her screen illuminating her focused face. A file label caught my eye. Rhodes Estate Asset Distribution Draft. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step going downstairs. My mother was still alive, still fighting in a hospital bed. And here was Evelyn, already planning what to take. She minimized the screen too fast when she noticed me. Too guilty, too comfortable touching things that weren't hers to touch. That was the first moment I truly realized something terrifying. Evelyn wasn't just controlling and difficult. She was preparing a complete takeover of everything my mother owned. And I was standing in her way. The funeral reception was held in a small community centre my mother loved. People filled the room with quiet condolences and casserole dishes. When most guests left to give us privacy, Evelyn slid beside me near the memorial table. Her voice was low but confident. "Since your mother didn't handle things properly before she passed, I'll oversee everything from here." My blood turned ice cold in my veins. I had just buried my mother that morning. The dirt was still fresh on her grave, and here was Evelyn, already circling the estate like a hungry vulture. She didn't even wait a respectful amount of time, didn't pretend to mourn, just moved straight into claiming what she believed she deserved. I nodded numbly, too grief-stricken to fight. But inside something hardened. A resolve I didn't know I possessed began forming like steel cooling into shape. 2 weeks after the funeral, Evelyn claimed administrator responsibility for the estate. She said she needed to conduct an official search and inventory of my mother's belongings. I trusted her because she was family, because I was drowning in grief and couldn't think straight. When I returned to my mother's house after giving her full access, I couldn't breathe. The furniture was gone, pieces my mother saved for years to buy. Heirlooms passed down from my grandmother had vanished. Boxes of childhood mementos, photographs, my baby clothes, all missing. The house echoed with emptiness. This wasn't administrative work, this was deliberate theft disguised as paperwork and responsibility. The rage that filled me wasn't hot or loud, it was ice cold and calculated. That's when the plan began forming in my mind. I wouldn't scream or beg. I would be smarter than that. I would be smarter than her. Most people would have confronted Evelyn immediately. They would have screamed, threatened, maybe even thrown punches. But I knew Evelyn expected that kind of reaction. She wanted drama because drama made her look like the victim. So, I played a different role. I acted small, broken, silent. I let her believe she had completely crushed me. When she asked how I was doing, I said, "Fine, just trying to cope." I didn't mention the missing items, didn't accuse her of anything. She smiled with satisfaction, thinking she'd won without a fight, but underestimation is the first gift an enemy gives you, and I was collecting every gift she handed over. While she celebrated her victory, I was quietly building my case. Patience became my strongest weapon, and she had no idea I even knew how to fight. A week later, the estate attorney sent me an email by mistake. It was labelled Evelyn's updated submission and contained documents she supposedly compiled independently. But something felt wrong about the files. I opened the document properties and checked the metadata, something my accounting training taught me to do. The file showed edits made at 2:12 in the morning, from her personal laptop, from her home IP address. She had altered distribution notes, erasing my entitlements and redirecting assets to herself. Legal theft, hidden in technical language and official-looking forms. I didn't confront her with this discovery. Instead, I saved everything to 3 different locations: cloud storage, external hard drive, and printed copies locked in a safe deposit box. Evidence only works if you protect it. And I was learning to protect myself in ways I never had to before. Back at the firm, the owners announced a routine internal audit. Every employee would need to validate their project contributions from the past year. Evelyn laughed when she heard the news, loud and confident. "This'll be easy for me," she told the team during a meeting. She had no idea I'd been documenting every stolen project for 12 months. Every time she took credit for my work, I kept the original files. Timestamps on my computer. Draft versions showing my writing style. Original spreadsheets in my actual handwriting. Comments and revision histories that proved creation dates. I had built an invisible paper trail she never knew existed. This audit was step 1 of my plan. Not revenge, but restoration. Taking back what was always mine. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be presented clearly. I met privately with the auditors in a small conference room. I brought everything organized in labeled folders. Not with anger or accusations, just facts and receipts, dates and documents that spoke for themselves. They raised eyebrows as they reviewed each piece of evidence. They took detailed notes, asking questions I knew Evelyn would later struggle to answer. "Did she ever acknowledge your contribution?" one auditor asked. I shook my head. She claimed full ownership every time. They exchanged glances that told me they understood, but I didn't stop there. I also provided character references from co-workers who witnessed her behavior but were too afraid to speak up. Anonymous statements that corroborated my experience. I wasn't tearing her down. I was simply revealing who she already was. The truth was doing the heavy lifting. I was just organizing it into something undeniable. At home, I worked late into the night reconstructing the entire estate file from scratch. My mother kept old physical documents in a fireproof box under her bed. Bank statements, purchase receipts, handwritten wills, photographs of family heirlooms with dates on the back. I compared them carefully with the documents Evelyn had submitted to the attorney. The discrepancies were glaring and sloppy. She changed dates, inflated values of items she claimed, erased entire sections about my inheritance. It was the kind of arrogant work only someone who believed they'd never be questioned would produce. I created a detailed timeline the attorney couldn't ignore. Side-by-side comparisons with highlighted differences. A narrative that showed her pattern of deception. My hands shook as I worked, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was uncovering. This was bigger than stolen furniture. This was systematic erasure. At work, Evelyn started hovering around my desk more than usual. "Harper, what are you working on?" she'd ask, her voice trying to sound casual. Her laugh became too loud, her smile stretched too tight across her face. She couldn't figure out why things felt different, but her instincts were warning her. I simply replied, "Just catching up on quarterly reports," without looking up from my screen. She believed me because she always believed I was harmless, that I was too weak and too damaged by grief to be a threat. Her arrogance was blinding her. Every day she underestimated me was another day I gathered more evidence. Another day I strengthened my position. Another day, closer to the moment everything would shift. I worked steadily and quietly, like I always had. Just a harmless accountant doing her job. Nothing to see here. The auditors requested that Evelyn redo 2 entire quarters of financial summaries. They said discrepancies were found that needed clarification. She panicked. Her face went pale in the meeting when they asked her to explain specific formulas or methodologies. She couldn't because they were my formulas, my methodologies. She'd stolen the work but never bothered to understand it. She stammered through weak explanations that made no technical sense. The auditors remained professionally neutral, but I could see the doubt forming in their expressions. Her carefully built facade was cracking. This was only the first tremor, small enough that she could still pretend everything was fine. But earthquakes don't announce themselves. They build pressure silently underground until the surface can't hold anymore. And the pressure was building faster than she realized. Her foundation was already compromised. She just didn't know it yet. The estate attorney called my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon. "Harper, I reviewed the timeline and documents you sent. We need to meet in person as soon as possible." His voice was serious but not unkind. Evelyn somehow heard about the meeting. Maybe she called his office. Maybe she had connections. She tried to schedule herself into my appointment, claiming she had information to provide. The attorney politely but firmly declined her request. "This meeting is specifically for Harper regarding her concerns," he told her. I watched her face when she hung up the phone. Fear flickered across her features for the first time. Real fear, not just irritation or anger. She was starting to understand that her control was slipping, that I wasn't playing the role she assigned me anymore. The nervous energy around her became almost visible. She was losing her grip, and she could feel it slipping away. I sat alone in my car, outside the attorney's building for 10 minutes. The grief hit all at once. Not anger this time, but loss. The pure, overwhelming sadness of losing my mother, the violation of having our shared memories stolen and sold, the exhaustion of fighting a woman who belittled my mother her entire life and now tried to erase me completely. Tears ran down my face, and I let them fall. I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back, but then I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I took 3 deep breaths, counting slowly. My mother raised me to be stronger than this moment. She taught me that crying was allowed, but giving up wasn't. I checked my reflection in the mirror, straightened my jacket and walked inside. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it. The attorney reviewed everything spread across his desk. Every missing heirloom documented. Every altered file compared to originals. Every timestamp analysed. He spent 2 hours going through my evidence without interruption. When he finally leaned back in his chair, his expression was grave. "Harper, what your aunt did constitutes administrative misconduct at minimum, possibly criminal fraud. Legally, this entire estate process must be reversed and reinvestigated." I felt a single tear slip down my cheek. Not sadness this time, but relief so powerful it hurt. Validation after weeks of being gaslit and dismissed. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. He explained the legal process, the timeline, the likely outcomes. Everything Evelyn took would be returned. Her authority was finished. Justice was slow, but it was coming. And for the first time since my mother died, I felt like I could breathe again. 2 days later, the firm owners called a full staff meeting. Everyone packed into the main conference room, confused about the sudden gathering. The owners stood at the front, their expressions professionally neutral. They announced that a major financial discrepancy had been flagged during the audit. All documentation and evidence pointed back to improper approval chains and falsified reports. Every single one signed off by Evelyn. Her face drained of all colour. She stammered excuses about miscommunication and honest mistakes. But the owners weren't interested in excuses, they wanted accountability. Evelyn, who was always loud and commanding, suddenly became quiet and small. Her hands shook as she tried to defend herself. It was another tremor, another crack in the foundation she built on lies. And everyone in that room could see her crumbling. The power she wielded so carelessly was being stripped away. The estate attorney filed formal paperwork removing Evelyn from all positions of authority regarding my mother's estate. Every item, every account, every single asset she'd stolen or redistributed would be legally returned to me. She was no longer allowed to manage, oversee, or even access anything connected to my mother's name. She found out via email, a cold and official notification. She stormed into my office 30 minutes later, her face red with rage. "You did this to me," she shouted, pointing her finger in my face. The entire office went silent, watching. I stayed completely calm, meeting her eyes, without flinching. "You did it to yourself, Evelyn. I just told the truth." My voice didn't shake, didn't waver. For the first time in my life, I stood my ground against her, and she had no response. No comeback. Nothing but rage and shock. Evelyn tried one final move to save herself. She attempted to charm the firm owners privately, insisting everything was just a terrible misunderstanding. She cried actual tears in their office. She blamed grief over losing her sister. She blamed the stress of handling estate responsibilities. She even blamed me, suggesting I was confused and vindictive. It was the first time I realized something important about her. She couldn't survive without control, without being admired and feared, without feeling superior to everyone around her. Her entire identity was built on power over others, and control was the one thing she no longer possessed. The owners listened politely to her explanations. They thanked her for coming in. But their decision was already made. Evidence doesn't care about tears or excuses. Facts don't change because someone cries. And the facts were absolutely clear. The audit officially concluded after 6 weeks of investigation. Every stolen report documented, every false credit exposed, every manipulated document revealed. The owners called Evelyn into a private meeting. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from co-workers. Their voices were controlled, firm, and professional. She wasn't fired with drama or public humiliation. No yelling or theatrical confrontations, just quiet accountability delivered with corporate precision. Her title was removed effective immediately. Her access to company systems was revoked. Her position was reassigned to someone who actually did the work. That someone was me. They offered me her job with a formal promotion and significant pay increase. I accepted, not out of revenge, but because I'd earned it, because I was qualified and capable, because it was finally time for truth to be rewarded. Evelyn packed her personal belongings into a cardboard box the next morning. I watched from across the office as her shoulders slumped forward. Her eyes were red from crying. She didn't look at anyone as she cleared out her desk, didn't offer goodbyes or explanations, didn't wear that familiar smirk. For the first time in my entire life, she looked completely human to me. Not powerful or intimidating or larger than life, just ordinary. Just someone who made terrible choices and had to face consequences. Part of me felt sad watching her leave. Not sorry for her, but sad for what could have been different. If she'd chosen kindness over control, if she'd valued people over power. Sometimes consequences are loudest when they arrive quietly. And this silence spoke volumes. The final estate confirmation came through 6 weeks after the investigation began. Every stolen item was legally ordered to be returned. Furniture, heirlooms, photographs, documents, everything. I stood in my mother's empty living room, the one Evelyn had stripped bare. Workers brought back each piece, carefully placing them where they belonged. The antique clock resumed its place on the mantel. My grandmother's jewellery box returned to the bedroom dresser. Boxes of childhood memories were stacked in the closet again. I smiled softly, touching each item like greeting an old friend. It wasn't about the physical objects themselves. It was about closure and dignity. It was about my mother's memory resting where it truly belonged, about honouring her life by protecting what she built. The house felt whole again. And so did I. With my promotion came significant changes. My pay increased by 40%. My workload actually improved because I no longer carried someone else's stolen credit. My voice suddenly mattered in meetings. Co-workers treated me differently, with respect earned rather than fear demanded. I stood straighter when I walked through the office. I spoke clearer during presentations. I lived lighter, without the constant weight of injustice crushing my shoulders. Every evening after work, I visited my mother's garden behind the house. I'd sit on the bench she built and talk to her. Tell her about my day. The wind felt different now, gentler, warmer, like she was listening, like she was proud of the daughter she raised, the daughter who finally learned to fight back without losing herself. I never reached out to Evelyn again after that final day. She never reached out to me either. We became strangers, which is probably what we always were underneath the forced family connection. Her downfall wasn't really my doing when I thought about it clearly. It was simply her own choices finally catching up after years of running ahead of consequences. My victory wasn't revenge, no matter how it might have looked from outside. It was restoration. It was peace. It was finally walking a path forward where I understood my own worth. I learned that you can't control what people take from you, but you can control whether you let them keep it. If there's anything this whole experience taught me, it's this simple truth. When someone steals everything from you, the most powerful thing you can do is take yourself back. Not with violence or cruelty, but with truth and dignity. And that's exactly what I did.